A very big welcome to everybody in different parts of the world. It's great that you could join us today for the Center for Global Higher Education panel on higher education and sustainability. This panel was originally scheduled to take place in April at the annual conference for reasons that everyone's very well aware of, that it wasn't able to happen. So we're really pleased that we've managed to reorganize to now. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here. It's great to see this turnout. I'm really looking forward to the debate today. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers for today. Then there are a couple of housekeeping announcements, and I will give a short introduction to the issues that we're going to be dealing with today. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion, and very much looking forward to your participation in the event today. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and this is in order that they're going to give their inputs. Jacqueline Nieri, a senior lecturer in education leadership and policy at Kenyatta University. Jacqueline, in addition to sustainability and higher education, researches a range of areas, including internationalization, open and flexible learning. She's co-chair of an important initiative in this field, which is the Education for Sustainable Development in Africa project and the Next Generation Research, which she'll probably tell you a little bit about. And Jacqueline and I know each other because we're working together on a new GCRF project, which is called Transforming Universities for a Changing Climate. And that's a project looking at how universities can work with communities to address climate change in Fiji, Mozambique, Kenya, and Brazil. A great pleasure to have you with us, Jacqueline. Our second speaker is Robin Shields, who is Professor of Education at the University of Bristol. Robin has very wide-ranging research interests, publishes widely on a range of issues, mainly around globalization of education, but looking at higher education as well as basic education, and a range of associated themes around aid and technology, student mobility. His article last year, in my view, is a very important one on the topic of student mobility and its impact on climate change, looking at the carbon footprint. And I think it's a really important issue that hasn't been addressed enough. So that's an important study to look at, and I'm sure Robin will speak to some of those ideas today. Our third panelist is Hilligje van 't Land, who is the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities. For many, many years, she has been tireless in campaigning at the international level and advocating for the higher education sector globally, along with more broadly issues of international cooperation and intercultural understanding. And she's worked very closely with international organizations, UN organizations, UNESCO particularly, on questions of sustainable development, education for sustainable development, but also research networks relating to the SDGs. So it's a huge pleasure to have her with us as well. It's a great group providing quite different perspectives on these important issues. Before we kick off, just a couple of the regular announcements that we make. And that we're going to put up a slide now just for you to see. So to confirm now that the session will be recorded and will be posted online at the CGHE website in due course. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. Please could you keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, obviously asking a question. You don't have to have your video on during the webinar, but we would ask you, if possible, and untidy bedrooms and pajama wearing allowing, please do turn on your videos when you're asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view so you can see more clearly who's talking. As regards to questions, if you would like to ask a question, and we're hoping there'll be lots of participation, could you use the chat function and write out the question that you wish to ask? What I'll do then is I will have a look at that, and I will write a message on chat to say which order we're going to take the questions. And then when it comes to you, we'll invite you to ask your question directly. Okay, so that's all as regards the housekeeping messages. So I'll move on now to make a few initial points to launch our discussion that our presenters are going to speak to for a short period each, and then we'll open the discussion. Higher education and sustainability. You might well ask whether this is motherhood and apple pie. Is anyone really against it? Should we all just go home and get on with doing it? Well, I would argue that there are some reasons why we need to have a sustained and critical discussion of the type that we're going to have today. And part of that is concerns normative questions about what we understand by these ideas, what we're really trying to do, what we're aiming at, and some of the moral and political ramifications. And part of it is empirical, about what's actually happening. Do we have evidence about what's happening? What kinds of interventions are occurring? What is their impact in practice, their effectiveness, and so forth? And I think there are, in both of those areas, there are very important things that we still need to deal with. Sustainable development, as I'm sure you're all well aware, is a coming together of two areas of practice and discourse in the second half of the 20th century. On the one hand, international development, questions of poverty, social justice, distribution, and so forth. And on the other hand, questions of the natural environment. And these are brought together and framed most prominently now in the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. But the balance between these different elements varies significantly. And quite often, when universities are talking about sustainability, they might be focusing just on the environmental elements. They might be focusing on climate change, which is part of that broader environmental agenda. In other times, more of the human elements, the social justice elements will be more prominent. So there's a continuum of way that term's been understood and implemented. There are, needless to say, very significant critiques of sustainable development, that it's too soft on the social justice elements, that it's in its supposed compatibility with capitalism, it's not really going to get us into a place of global justice. There are also critiques from environmentalists that it's too soft in terms of lifestyle changes and resource, zero growth and reduction in resource use. Also, questions around technology are very debated. To what extent should we have faith in a future technological fix? Again, implicates universities very strongly. To what extent do we need broader societal shifts? So the university's placed front and center in these debates, of course, partly because of climate science, but also because of its educational role, community engagement, and so forth. But some very significant normative questions around the university as well. Some people pose the question, is it really the place of the university to be promoting values around sustainable development? Is that really the role of universities? What are the limits on the kind of impact that universities can have? As well as the kinds of complex epistemic questions that we've been grappling with since 2016 around post-truth, distrust of experts, denial, and so forth. On the empirical side, there are a huge number of initiatives in this field. Higher Education Sustainability Initiative, lots of work around the SDGs. Hilligje and I were at an event at Wilton Park which brought together many university leaders, Association of Commonwealth Universities, for the Francophone Association. So there's a lot of interest in aligning work with the SDGs. But as yet, we don't have a strong evidence base around what universities are doing, what has been effective, and particularly beyond the high research production countries, little research on lower middle income countries, and on particular aspects of the topic, and particularly on how universities can link together the different spheres of their work, how these issues have been affected by global trends in higher education policy and practice, such as marketization and so forth. and more recently, how this interacts with COVID. We can't avoid bringing that into our discussions today. So with that, I will hand over to the first of our presenters. We're going to go through in turn short presentations, and then we'll open out to questions and discussion. I'll hand over to Jacqueline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tristan, for the kind introduction and also for giving us a sneak view of the presentations today. I'm going to pick up from what you've mentioned regarding research and practice in higher education and what developing countries, specifically Africa, what has been the context of my presentation. Research is not widespread, and so is the practice in terms of sustainable development programs on the continent. And we all know that much of our activities, and even when we talk about development, we're thinking about how do we meet the day-to-day demands on education and resources. And sustainable development comes on to as an additional demand in terms of higher education as well as practice even beyond higher education. 2008, I'm going to give a program, I'm going to give a brief of what has been, and this is only based on a case of Education for Sustainable Development program in Africa that was launched in 2008. This is a program that involves a number of universities across the continent, 8 of them collaborating together to offer programs on education for sustainable development. The program was a collaboration between the 8 universities and United Nations University to try and address comprehensively the issues of curriculum as well as research on the continent. And 2013, the program was launched in the universities. There are 3 programs within the Education for Sustainable Development programs, looking at the issues to do with development on the continent. They are widespread, and both rural, urban areas are affected, as well as we also have issues to do with mining and mineral resources. So the programs are 3 in one. One of them is concerned with sustainable urban development, and the other is in terms of integrated rural development, and one is on management of mineral resources. Why this program is because looking at the populace, the African populace, much of or many of the populace is in the rural areas, and looking at the dependence on agriculture or dependence on agriculture and the issues that have been brought about by changing climate, you find that the populace is getting poorer using the traditional methods. And the program is designed specifically to target rural development, issues to do with poverty eradication, food security, and also water, sanitation, as well as sustainable energy. So the program is intended to focus on these areas and to get to train people at master's level who can then be practitioners and also researchers, as well as policymakers in these areas. The program is implemented by 4 universities in the western part of Africa. In Nigeria, we have University of Ibadan, and in Ghana, we have the University of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah University for Science and Technology, as well as University for Development Studies. Looking at the issues that are affecting the rural areas, we also are faced with the issue of rural-urban migrations. We have pull factors to the urban centers and leading to the challenges that now affect urban areas. Urban poverty, overcrowding, as well as unemployment. And this also influenced the development of a program on sustainable urban development, also to tackle the issues of urban development. Its priority is to alleviate poverty in the urban areas, but also to offer an inclusive space that assures self-employment opportunities through training and entrepreneurship. This program is offered at at two institutions within East Africa, University of Nairobi and Kenyatta University. But again, just like the sustainable integrated rural development, this program does not just focus on offering these programs to students in the Eastern Africa, but the programs are designed in such a way that they can accommodate or they can admit students from across the continent and get to improve training as well as research in the area of sustainable urban development. Then we have the MMR, which is the Management of Mineral Resources program that is addressing issues and challenges that come with mining in Africa, issues to do with stakeholders' engagement, a balance between production and also environmental safety, health, and socioeconomic issues surrounding communities, of the surrounding communities. This program is offered by two institutions in the Southern Africa, University of Cape Town and also University of Zambia. This, the target is also expected that it would get to admit students from across the continent to improve research in these areas, but they are based in the two institutions. The distinguishing feature of this is the joint ownership of the programs, because we know the complexity of sustainable development. It requires that we share resources as well as expertise. So the joint program ownership of the 8 universities has seen or has fostered South-South cooperation, whereby instead of just competition among the universities or between universities, institutions have come together to co-design, co-create, and share knowledge and information. The modules and also the curricula has similarities across, so that students can be able, it can foster also mobility across and the sharing of expertise in institutions. Emphasis on field orientation also as well. So internship is one of the features that has been integrated in this, because then institutions, rather than do research, theoretical research, students are given an opportunity to work with communities before they develop their research papers or their research proposals, so that they can then have a problem-solving orientation and get to address issues affecting communities. There's also the involvement of young faculty in terms of research, so that besides training, there's also support in terms of research and the development or the provision of materials. Research is not widespread in this area, and so the integration of young faculty into research, into these programs to do research as the next generation researchers, is to allow the programs benefit from production of materials that would support the programs beyond the theoretical knowledge that is taught in the classrooms. So the next generation researchers are expected to make a pool or to produce a pool of resources that can be used by the learners in these programs, but also to get to produce materials in this area, in this field. The experience provides a genuine, an example of how genuine network can work to collaborate and also to provide research that is useful in terms of sustainable development. And this is illustrated by the collaboration among institutions in the South in the development of materials, but also in terms of sharing and co-teaching that is an integral part of the program, where the expertise do not just have to be in one institution, but they can be shared. And this would use or would benefit from the use of ICTs, which are supposed to be integrated into the program so that students, those who cannot move, can still benefit from faculty across the board. That would also ease the challenge, because what has been in the implementation of the programs, a major challenge has been in terms of funding to provide or to allow internship and also mobility of students. And besides the MMR program, which has been successful in terms of exchanging students and faculty, the other programs, the Sustainable Urban Development and the Integrated Rural Development, they have not benefited from that because of funding. The African Development Bank funded the MMR program, and also the researchers to carry out research on these areas that has given rise to publications in sustainable development for use and also for dissemination. I think I would stop there for now.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Jacqueline. Great to have that in-depth experience presented. We'll come back to some of those points, I'm sure. Pass over now to Robin. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tristan. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today and thank the CGHE for hosting us and Tristan for chairing. So I'm going to direct my comments mainly in relation to universities and climate change, recognizing that this is only one aspect of sustainability, which incorporates a much broader set of considerations, and also recognizing the work of Tristan and Jacqueline in this area is very exciting, and there'll probably be a lot more coming out here. And I think many of us will be looking forward to reading some of the work coming out of your project. So I'm going to try to keep things brief and make three overall points. The first point is that universities contribute to climate change. By contribute to climate change, I mean they make it worse. They don't contribute to solving the problem. They contribute to climate change itself, probably more than they would like to realize, and more than many of us who work in universities would like to realize. There are several ways that they do this. One, as Tristan said at the beginning of the session, is through international student mobility. There are, or I should say there were, about 4 million students who undertook international travel for their study every year in 2019. And most of them fly where they're going, and this has an immense carbon footprint, about 30 megatons. That number doesn't really mean much to us because we don't really work in megatons in education, but to put it in perspective, it's about the same emissions as a smaller medium-sized country like Croatia. That's just student travel. Of course, many staff travel around the world frequently. Arguably, they contribute more emissions, and these emissions are probably less justified. They're not going through a long-term transformative experience. They're often going for a relatively short duration, just perhaps to meet people. So there's less argument that it has a social benefit. So travel is one way that universities contribute to climate change. Another is through investments in fossil fuels. So many universities, particularly in North America, have large endowments. The total value of all US university endowments is about $500 billion US dollars, I read recently. The vast majority of these institutions have not divested from fossil fuels. So they invest money in pulling fossil fuels out the ground and burning those fossil fuels, which creates climate change. In the UK, endowments are somewhat lower, although Oxford has about 7 billion in its entire system. The Wellcome Trust has 20 billion, which has not been divested from fossil fuels. And the USS, the University Pension Scheme, is also invested in fossil fuels. So we are all somewhat involved in this. And finally, universities prepare students for jobs in a carbon-based economy. And because of the employability mandate, they often focus on aspirations to work in environmentally destructive fields as legitimate and worthy causes of higher education or outcomes from higher education. To be fair, people who work in universities cannot change the demands of the labor market, but they do have some control over the extent to which they service it through education. Here, universities are not malevolent or evil, but rather they have very little agency because neoliberal funding models limit their agency. In a competitive environment, universities must compete to survive, and students who are paying a high price for their education must ensure there's an economic return. So both sides, as it were, in the teaching arrangement are constrained by the structural conditions in a way that creates negative environmental consequences often. So that's the first argument. The second is that universities therefore cast climate change as a technocratic problem. This allows us to make the argument that we have a net benefit in terms of climate change, because although we create environmental costs, we also create benefits, particularly in forms of research that leads to lower carbon technologies or more efficient technologies that decrease environmental consumption. An example of this argument is from Universities UK, who in 2010 said, universities have a unique and critical role in helping to address the challenge of climate change. Our higher education sector is a major player within the global search for solutions to environmental problems and in the development of sustainable ways of living. Through their research and links with business and industry, universities are positioned to drive forward innovation in all areas of life: construction, energy supply, transport, design, and many others. You would see similar arguments if you looked in the ads in many issues of Times Higher Education, in which universities often promote their development of sustainable technologies through research. Here, I think one of the most insightful comments comes from a great article that was released during the lockdown period in June. It's called Scientists' Warning on Affluence, and it's published in the journal Nature Communications. And the authors of this article look at long-term trends in consumption and in increases in technological efficiency, or efficiency increases caused by technology. And their argument is that any environmental benefits that are created through technological efficiency will always be eclipsed in the long run through increases in consumption. So there is no way to innovate yourself out of the problems of climate change. In their words, any transition towards sustainability can only be effective if far-reaching lifestyle changes complement technological advancements. They continue to say, burgeoning consumption has diminished or cancelled out any gains brought about through technological change at reducing environmental impact. So the argument that technology may solve climate change doesn't have much evidence to support it other than perhaps wishful speculation. This means that a response to climate change must be a social movement that reconsiders the entitlements and claims of different stakeholders, particularly across generations and across the global north and south. Therefore, argument 3, and I'll wrap up quickly here. Universities have an ambiguous track record on progressive social movements. This may come as a surprise, as many people who work in universities consider themselves progressive. However, speaking in broad terms, university management will generally do what is required to stand on the right side of history, but probably not much more than that. An example would be in the recent Black Lives Matter movement in May and June, when many universities issued statements in support of Black Lives Matter, but critics rightly pointed out that their staffing does not reflect this statement of support, as most disproportionately underrepresent Black staff, particularly at senior levels. Progressive change has usually come from pressure by students, for example, the Rhodes Must Fall movement, or NUS campaigns for the divestment against apartheid. Universities have been the sites of struggle more than they have been actors in the struggle for social justice. So I'll wrap up there and say, in summary, structural conditions, particularly neoliberal funding models, do not favor universities as a potential solution to climate change. And we should treat any claim that they are an actor working to address climate change with due skepticism. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin, for that analysis and the wake-up call, and for universities to grasp the nettle of the negative as well as positive impacts. Thank you. We will pass to our final speaker now, Hilligje.
Thank you. This is very interesting to listen already to Jacqueline and to Robin, and to actually embark on a discussion that is really looking at more the environmental dimensions of sustainable development. But as Robin already said, there are many other aspects to it that are equally important to also raise, and to look at the overall spectrum of how universities engage with sustainable development. As you said, Tristan, at the beginning, I think it's also important to look a little bit at the overall opportunities to engage further with sustainable development in the short, medium, and long term in respect of what is happening today with higher education. As we all know, and this is certainly no secret, almost all HEIs around the world have been equally affected by COVID-19 crisis. And the crisis has affected all institutional activities, including the enrollment of the students, including the capacity of staff to act, including the opportunity for universities to undertake the projects they were supposed to undertake, including there as well the research that they were planning on undertaking. Some governments have provided support for higher education institutions, but it's mainly emergency support to complete the academic year. And a lot has tried to be done over the summer to help these universities around the world that are starting a new academic year to actually indeed start the academic year, or where they already started initially, like in Asia, for instance, or in Latin America, to start a second semester. So the moving online of all the teaching and all the activities of the universities, and we see it, Jacqueline says she's still at home, Robin is still at home, most of the staff, even at an organization like the International Association of Universities, are also being invited to work from home rotationally because of the situation today. All of this brought to the fore quite a few challenges that universities actually have to engage with, but also showed that the university is at a crossroads, and that they probably also need to look at what they do in a different light. So if universities are deeply affected, we're entering an age of uncertainty that actually comes with many challenges and risks, but also certainly with opportunities, because we need to move from a situation in which we were before and move into something else. And I've been challenging one of the UN new phrases, building back better. I think we don't need to build back, we need to build forward and to build something new in order to address these very topics that have been highlighted also by Jacqueline, and more strongly, or even as strongly, by Robin. So the challenges today are multiple, and they are challenges to sustainable development and the capacity of universities to engage with sustainable development, and you will see why. Because the financial crisis that will hit many universities everywhere is not yet there, but it is coming, and it is coming very fast. It is expected, in particular in Latin America, that many of the universities will not even be able to reopen at any point in time. And what is happening already, we heard from many of the board members of the IAU, is that where the universities and schools have been closed long time, students and pupils are not coming back to the education systems whatsoever. So to educate them into something different, those are lost to that part of the opportunity that was and one of the opportunities for universities. So the financial crisis is hitting many different parts of our societies, including the institutions, but also including the families who are to attend, and the schools and the universities. So there is an enrollment crisis that is coming up. And next to that, there is also a lot of challenge to anything that is being done anywhere. So we can throw many stones at the higher education edifice, but it is also very important to see what can be retained and what is good at it, and how it can be constructed and reconstructed in order to even better participate in the development of the kind of world that we want for the many in the future. So where the challenge is also this growing inequalities and even the loss of relevance of much of what we do, we have to look at what the opportunities are. And we see there is some kind of paradigm shift here as well, because there are movements coming up saying that there are new means, new ways in which we can do things. Not the least the digitalization that we see of higher education today, because it offers the opportunity to reach out to many of those who could not attend higher education, who could not participate in debates, who could not listen into many of the conversations that are taking place anywhere. So these are opportunities to actually look into these different topics and debate them with everyone across stakeholder barriers, across disciplines and across countries and continents. Because there is increased access. On the one hand, there is an enrollment crisis. On the other, there is an opportunity for increased access in a different way and offering thus different opportunities. There's also a shift towards more global engagement. We've understood with this pandemic that nothing is only local, but everything is global. And we have to really work together in order to make the best out of what we have, and to ensure that where a problem is to be seen and addressed in one country, it needs to be connected to what is happening anywhere else in the world. And thus, the hope is that there may be ultimately some more equality, and that we will regain some social relevance of everything that is being done in education at large and higher education in particular. So the opportunities are there, but they should be grabbed. So we hope it is not building back better what we knew before, but building something new on different basis, really on the basis of the kind of discussions that we have here today. So we have to look at teaching, we have to look at the way we do research, and we have to look at how we do community engagement, because we have to better respond to the challenges that have been highlighted here today. So we have to build the kind of modern university that is required to actually fulfill the promise of the university as a common public good for the good of the public and of the many. So there is a possibility to better connect those who were not connected before, and also different stakeholders. And that is one of the opportunities as well that we saw, where there was a loss of relevance and a loss of belief in the capacity of universities to act and to be part of the bigger debate and to really contribute where it should. With the pandemic, many governments have turned to their higher education systems to ask for the information they needed to be able to address the pandemic itself. It is not only a health crisis we have, it's an economic one, it's a social one, it's a cultural one, and there are many others that we are to expect still to see in the near future. And thus it is important that we look at also these other dynamics that are coming up. And they're coming up bottom up. The students are really those who are now calling for a true transformation of what is happening around, and not only them, but also in the kind of education that they receive. They're becoming more critically engaged, but positively critical also by calling for different kinds of education, really also debating data, really looking at these facts and figures that are being shared here, there, and everywhere, and trying to make sense out of it and calling for a transformation. And there is a top-down approach as well, where we see that the leadership of institutions have heard what is happening. They've heard their staff, they've heard the students. And yes, I don't want to be overly optimistic and naive, but there is a movement there, I believe, that is offering the opportunities for looking into something different for the future. So yes, universities contribute to climate change in the wrong way, but I also strongly believe that universities contribute to climate change in a very positive way, in the sense that there is an enormous amount of money that is being, it's not the money, it is the time and quality time invested by staff within all disciplines to address and engage with all the different SDGs. So it is not only 13, but it is from SDG 1, no poverty, to all, including SDG 17, where there is an increased dynamics of participation across disciplines, across institutions, across countries on continents and between continents. The IAU has created an IAU global cluster on the Sustainable Development Goals, which is work that is building on 30 years of experience and exchange on what universities can do over time to engage with sustainable development. And we see incredibly innovative work being done in terms of how we work together, what we work on, and what we address. I think Jackline's example was a good one of 8 universities working together. We have these universities at the regional level, and we also bring them together at the international level. So the University of Ghana is working with the University of Bergen and is working with the University of the West Indies, etc. So we're triangulating research and education across the world so that the dynamics that are with a local resonance somewhere find new solutions in the dynamics of co-creation and cooperation. I could go on there as well. I think it is better if I leave it at this, but I would like to also really stress this important part that universities are not only those who are putting words on paper and saying that things are happening. There are many things that are indeed happening. And what we're working very hard towards is to bring this to the fore, showcase it at many different fora, and not only in universities, in university debates, but also at the UN level or at any other fora where we need to connect also the higher education work with the government work, with the research work, and with the communities at large. So a word of hope there as well, and of work that is being done for the future. And sometimes I believe that there is not enough voice given to that. It is easier to criticize than to also recognize the excellence that is out there. So I would like to leave it at this for now and then engage in the conversation.
Thank you very much for that broad perspective and the links with COVID and other things, and also the hopeful note, which we certainly share. Thank you to all of our speakers for launching this discussion with such a diverse set of ideas and experiences. We're going to move on now. What we'll do is, as I said before, I will go to each of the the people going to ask questions in turn. If you could switch on your videos and microphones and ask your question live, that would be great. So we have time for more questions. I won't ask all of the panelists to answer all of the questions. I will just ask one of them to give it an answer. If the speakers, if you particularly fancy one of the questions, if you could signal to me in some way, otherwise I will select someone who I think might give an answer to that. So we'll turn first to Anwar Rumjaun for the first question.
Thank you. Hello, I'm from Mauritius. So my question is a bit, okay, I acknowledge that there are a lot of concrete examples for integrating sustainability issues in the programs in universities. But if we take it from a broader perspective, being from a biologist, so I will use biological terms, how can higher education institution embed sustainability in their DNAs? And the second part of my question, I've heard Robin and even the last speaker talking about the COVID. So could COVID and the Black Lives Matter could be promoters or catalyst of accelerating this sustainability element into higher education programs? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Robin, do you have any reflections?
So I think the first part of the question is really interesting, and it's one that challenges me and keeps me up. How could we embed sustainability into our DNA? Probably a good first step, I think, for many in universities would be to lead by example, rather practice what we preach, if you like, rather than kind of falling into what many bad teachers do, which is say, do as I'm telling you, not as I'm doing myself. So if we could make the university a living example of sustainability, rather than an organization which engages in unsustainable practices, but is not sustainable itself. So that would be kind of my goal or my wish for universities at the present. The other thing that I think is always worth keeping in mind is that universities have limited agency, but people have agencies. Universities are made of people who act as individuals. They're always dependent on wider social context for funding, for the people that work there. And so we probably need to think maybe beyond just what can universities do. And in my presentation, I fall into this problem of saying universities contribute to climate change. Universities would like you to think of it as a technical challenge. Universities don't exist other than in the people that work in them. And so we kind of need to think about what conditions are we giving universities? Are they dependent on competition, on market finance, for example, to sustain themselves? If so, it's maybe unrealistic to think that they are going to find a way to incorporate sustainability into their DNA if the conditions of the university are not sustainable.
Do you want to take the question next, Jacqueline, or should I? Because Adwar had a question that.
There's no need for everyone to answer, but go ahead, Hilligje, if you've got something to add to Robin's.
Yeah. I think that the lead by example is a very good one, and there are many examples of universities that actually lead by example. There is the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, for instance, is providing for interesting examples on how to mitigate the travel emissions of staff and students by investing differently in whatever they do. So anyone traveling has to pay something into a pot. That pot is used then for something else, and it is used for innovative approaches to many of the other things that they do. They've looked at all their operations to also see if any of their investments would be made in the wrong places. So they have a team really looking at all those dimensions and trying to ensure that the investment in fossil fuels is off their radar altogether. So there are many universities who are very much aware of that and working on those dimensions. It's not easy to do that overnight, but there are opportunities and there is movement towards that. And then over the last few years with an international team, we've worked a lot on the concept of whole of institution approach to sustainable development. And the framework that we've come up with is one that provides also for examples on how to embed sustainable development in every operation of an institution. And that is something that could be disseminated better. It is there, it has been disseminated, it's being used by many, but not by all. But a whole of institution approach to sustainable development is probably one that we would need to embed or foster better. What we also do to raise awareness for all these different dimensions at the IAU is carry out global surveys on higher education and research for sustainable development. We've done 2 of these editions, and we will do a 3rd one. And every discussion I have, I note down what we have to include in order to better observe what is happening and how people are operating. And one of the things that we see moving up is strategic development around sustainable development, not only in disciplines, but also at the level of the institution. And so it becomes an overall strategy where sustainable development is really called to be translated into very actionable actions within the institution. And reports are there to also show that words are really transforming into something that is of use to the debate and the transformation. And last but not least, very quickly, the IAU brings a large community of higher education institutions to New York, and you may say, well, they fly to New York and what's all that? Yet it is very important because higher education was not present when Agenda 2030 was drafted, and higher education has started to embark with the agenda itself only since a few years. And that is simply because they were not called to the table to participate. So when we bring higher education to the different sessions that we organize at the New York High-Level Political Forum, where the different SDGs are being reviewed on an annual basis, we really make the case for all the different stakeholders to count on universities to help develop the kind of solutions that are required to address and engage with the Sustainable Development Goals as it should. And we see progress over time. And we hope that the future will show us right in traveling there and make the case for a strong role, and the strong role that universities already play.
Great, thank you very much. Anxious to get in as many of these great questions as possible. We'll move now to Zachary Spire.
Good morning, colleagues. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Good morning.
Yes.
I'm chiming in from San Diego, and the bee in my bonnet is the physical estate of universities. And I'm wondering if any colleagues have any comments on balancing the sort of social value, social benefit we find in being able to be, if you will, proximally around each other. And how do you balance that in light of the incredible demand on energy consumption and carbon production that is required in order to maintain our university estates? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps either Robin or Jacqueline would like to speak to the question of university buildings and campuses, physical environment.
I could go on that. Thank you, Zachary, for the question, and I'm going to address this from actually the project that Tristan and I are undertaking on transforming universities for a climate change. So what we've been looking at comprehensively and going forward is what practices at the university level, as well as as well as their approach in terms of linking with the communities. So at the university level, for the literature we've reviewed in some of the institutions, we realized that there's more towards engaging at the teaching and research level than the greening itself in the institutions that we've looked at. So institutions are pretty much still very traditional in terms of energy consumption. And even when we talk about sustainable development, much of it is still linked to curriculum rather than the practices themselves. But that's in a limited perspective from the study that we're undertaking at the moment.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I wondered whether you might also answer Amy's question. So I'll bring in Amy straight away, because I think that will link into what you're saying there. Amy Campbell.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you for the compelling presentations. I'll make this as concise as possible. I represent the Environmental Society of Durham University, and very briefly, Durham tends to push students along the routes of investment banking and commercial law. It's still considered very unusual to pursue a career in sustainability. So Jacqueline or Robin, as a professor of education, massive fan of your research, by the way, we are working on pushing through a sustainability module for all first-year students to undertake next academic year. How would you suggest we go about gaining the support to reform the academic curriculum to include more sustainability?
Sorry, I did not get the question, the last question.
No, I didn't hear.
How would you
repeating
suggest
that, just the last bit, Amy?
Yeah, of course. How would you suggest that we go about gaining the support to reform the academic curriculum to include more sustainability topics?
And I think key point there, across all different disciplines and courses. Right? Yeah.
Across all disciplines, yeah.
Yes, in my opinion, essentially the programs looking at what institutions do in terms of addressing or integrating sustainability. You find that the schools of environment or geography, those related more to development, that actually get to pick these, but the practice should have been that all programs, all faculty get to integrate these regardless of the programs they are integrated in. And in terms of getting stakeholders on board, then it means that it is beyond the university level, but also to get on stakeholders like government and also the NGOs, as well as those who are pushing for sustainability practices, if I got your question right.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. We have a big question up next. Emiliano Bozio. Question we've all been wanting to know the answer to, I'm sure. Go ahead, Emiliano.
Thanks, Tristan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question really moves the focus on sort of a provocation. So whether or not universities still promote critical values and knowledge, for example, by encouraging students to show interest and actually be engaged with what we define as sustainability. So in other words, whether or not the neoliberal logic is so dominating that we, the academics, I'm a senior lecturer at a Japanese university in Tokyo, we as academics still are encouraging our students to show some interest in sustainability.
Hilligje, would you like to have a go at that one?
I'm not sure I understand the question, the real question. Can you repeat the exact question?
Yeah.
It might be helpful to look at the one that was in the chat as well, which counterpoints the civic development of students or against the consumerism aspect. Do you want to add to that, Emiliano?
Yeah, sure. I think the best way is just to quickly read the second part of the question, is whether or not higher education is able to go beyond the neoliberal logic, and whether or not higher education is promoting sort of a selfishness and consumerism rather than encouraging our students to be engaged into sustainability.
We if you want, because time is ticking, but very quickly, there is our cluster group on SDG 12, responsible consumption. Is really a very strong group. It is led by the University of Regina in Canada, together with Moi University in Kenya, and many others around them. And there's an enormous amount of work being done on how to transform many of the curricula across disciplines to actually look at that. And we see that there is an opportunity. It actually ties with the question of Amy, I would say, on the necessity to bring the different disciplines together to reflect and have a kind of problem-based approach to issues, and then shed light on issues that we are challenged with in order to find the solutions. I think in Japan in particular, you have Society 5.0, which is a movement that is growing and that I found very interesting in terms of also pushing the universities to look at their curriculum, to look at what is happening, especially also in light of the many hazard, climate, all the issues that Japan is facing. They see that their students and have to be educated in a different way. And they in particular said that the COVID-19 period was an excellent moment for them to engage much more strongly with their students on these different issues, because they were not moonlighting somewhere else, working somewhere to pay for their studies. They were stuck in their room. They were to study. They were to work together. They were to find new solutions to the issues that were in front of them. And so I believe that there is definitely a way for universities to contribute to transforming our thinking around consumption and all of that. And there is a movement that is starting. Another last thing I would say there has been a strong movement of sustainability offices around the world, and these are student-led, but they are working hand in hand with the management and with the leadership of universities, and the bottom-up movement that creates is also pushing for better integration of all these aspects in the curricula, but all the other aspects of a university.
Thanks. I'll give Robin a chance to answer that in a moment. But as we're reaching the end, I wonder if we could just have the final three questions all together, and then I will turn it over to the three speakers to give any responses, quick responses they'd like to give to those, and to any final reflections that they'd like to give before we wrap up. So Monty, and then Kathy, and then Fiona.
Thanks, Tristan. Mine's a very quick one for Jackline. I was really interested in her work and talking about using ICTs for sustainable development education in Africa. And more specifically, just wondering how the students were accessing educational resources. Are they going to university libraries or internet hubs, or are they accessing the resources on their personal devices, things like mobile phones and other devices, or is it a bit of a mixture?
Thanks very much. We'll come back to that. Kathy?
Hi, yes, I was wondering, and it's more of a conceptual question, I guess, how we can actually change a running system whilst we are all still also like constrained by the system, basically, and particularly, of course, by financing and how we do economics, basically. Whether it's possible to, without actually shutting everything down, to have kind of a reboot, and whether panelists had any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Fiona.
Yeah, thank you. So interestingly, yesterday I spent at a away day for governors and senior managers and student union representatives of Westminster University. And the theme of the day was about sustainability and how it connects with or doesn't with equalities agenda and with the wellbeing agenda for students and staff. And my question really is about how we do more to harness the kind of the youth movement and student passions around this, because I have to reflect that, you know, the governing bodies of the institutions don't tend to be necessarily at the forefront of change. When I was a student, you know, I was on marches around apartheid and investment, university investment in supporting that. So I know it can be done, it can make change. And I'm really interested in the panel's views about how we could move that forward more quickly than we are doing now.
So lots there, but we will only be able to have a short final comment and reflection from each of the speakers, I'm afraid, because of time. We'll go in the order that they presented. So we'll start with Jacqueline.
Thank you, Tristan. I'll respond to the question by King relating to ICTs. Perhaps this did not come out very clearly, but the ICT usage is proposed to start now. It has not been utilized before, as the program was designed to have students move and have lectures between universities. But because this has not happened at a broader scale because of challenges with resources. So now the proposal is to have ICT so that students who are not able to move can still access lectures from institutions they are not participating in. So the ICT has not been deployed yet, but it's supposed to be deployed to get students to access lectures and expertise across universities without necessarily moving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin.
Great. I would like to try to tie together Amy's question and Kathy and Emiliano and also Fiona's comments. It's very nice to see you, Fiona. Hope you're well. I think the answer Fiona's story shows is the students, really. Students are the only actors in our system that really will create meaningful change, which is odd. We think of them as coming to university to receive education, but I think they have been the source of progressive change in higher education in the past, and they might be in this case too. I hope they are.
Yeah, I think also that a lot is happening as far as students are concerned. You know of the NUS, Student Movement National Union of Students. You probably know of the All African Student Union, who's doing an enormous amount of work on sustainable development. There is the Sustainability Week, something that has started in Switzerland and is now emulating elsewhere. There is an enormous group of students working around ASHE in the US. There is a very big group in the Arusha in Colombia that is coming up with a student initiative. So indeed, students are active and they're calling for transformation. I still also believe that staff is also part of the very movement, because they have a lot to contribute. And they are there to actually educate the next generations into critical thinking. So they should be the ones who are also part and parcel of the debate. Obviously not all, but many will agree and accept the challenges that are now put to them in many different ways by the students and by society at large as well.
Great, thank you so much, all of the speakers, for those final reflections and for your initial presentations. So much there, of course. I think we've just whetted the appetite for more. Thank you also all of those who asked questions. There are many more comments also in the chat function that you may have seen beyond the questions that were asked, and resources provided. And I understand that these are made available afterwards. So if you want to put in a few more things, there's still time to add on to that now before we close it off. Some people have put resources relating to their talks as well. One announcement that's come through, don't miss on Tuesday the book launch for Changing Higher Education for a Changing World. That's the next CG event. That should be great. And also just to round off the session formally, big thank you to all of you for taking the time to join what is, I'm sure you'll agree, an absolutely critical issue for all of us working and interacting with higher education. So thank you very much, and hope you have a very good day. Enjoy the rest of the seminar.